working at a publicly traded multi-billion dollar company to starting your own consulting practice.
I didn't want to exit this life not having pursued something as challenging as this. I just felt the compulsion to go try something. I'd never done it before.
So what kind of a runway did you have?
I have a wife who is transitioning her career. I've got 3 kids. I've got 2 dogs. I couldn't just quit and see if it worked out. So I had given myself personal OKRs and had it set. One of the key results was essentially having enough runway to feel like I could make the leap.
How you got your first paying customer?
The first real revenue generating client was an old high school friend that I had reconnected with as part of this jumpstart, because I also identify as a pretty shy and introverted person. I had never really formally done any kind of networking. I wrote about this in my newsletter, but I printed out the member directory, and in the directory, people would list the things that they needed help with. I went through the hundreds of people and I would just highlight whether someone needed help with something that I could help them with. And then I would reach out to them and say, hey, I noticed that you wanted help with OKRs. I have a lot of experience with OKRs. Do you want to get on a call and we can talk through OKRs?
What's the backstory behind the name Group 18?
So my last name is Noble, and the periodic table of elements, the far right-hand column is the noble gases. I had done an extensive research, never started a company. What am I going to name the first one? That's where I ended up. I thought it was a good mix of my name and a scientific approach.
Do you think having Atlassian worked at Atlassian helps a lot with the reputation and the brand and the trust?
Honestly, no.
Kevin, welcome to the show.
I appreciate you having me on. I'm excited to talk.
Thanks a lot for coming. I am super excited about this one because, as I mentioned before, I've been reading some of your different phases of your life, professional life, and I'm really excited about this phase, which is phase 5, I guess.
Yeah.
So before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and before starting Group 18?
Yes. So professional life started as a mechanical engineer. I went to Ford Motor Company to do some powertrain engineering and all-wheel drive systems engineering. But after a few years, I realized that wasn't going to be the life that I wanted. I was a little too narrowly focused and I had some broader interests to explore. So I left the automotive world and came down here to Texas, but stayed in the hardware kind of industry. I did computer manufacturing for a few years, and then I moved into warehouse management software. So think large distribution center and getting a box from a shelf out into a truck into the right order. And so did the hardware lifecycle for them. So all of our design and deployment and manufacturing, et cetera. I had a group of controls engineers who reported into me there, and controls engineers is a mix of mechanical, which is my background, but also electrical and software development. And it was a software development piece as a hardware person, just highlighted how much of our modern world is built on software, and I had no exposure to it. And so that drove me to go to Atlassian, which is a software company based out of Australia. I did business transformation for them in the support department. And so that meant scaling all of the data and the processes and the software tools as that company was growing, which was, I like to say, about 50% year over year for about a decade. And so at the end, I had about 135 folks reporting into me. This is data scientists, data engineers, software developers, architects, learning and development, et cetera. But I knew there needed to be a change. And so we'll get into maybe the transition and all the things. But yeah, that's what I did before Group 18.
Okay. So then you're working, and how long were you there for at Atlassian? For 10 years or
10 and a half,
close to it? Okay. So you saw them through like hyper growth all the way to IPO. So when did IPO, you were there?
Yeah, they were private when I joined. And then the IPO 2 years later, something like that.
Okay. So now, and when you left the business, it's what, like, I think 5 billion in revenue,
That's
at
correct.
least publicly. That's so from working at a publicly traded multi-billion dollar company to starting your own consulting practice, like going solo.
Yeah.
Walk us through that. What was the trigger? What prompted you to go, you know what?
Yeah.
I'm gonna start this on my own.
Like a lot of big changes like that, I'd say there are many factors. Certainly one was the culture of the company had changed quite a bit from the early days, and no longer was the culture that I felt like I was going to do my best work in or was going to enjoy. My wife had changed her own career, and I'll say that inspired me somewhat. She was a mechanical engineer like me, and she is now becoming a midwife, and so quite a big change there.
Yeah.
I read a lot of Stoic philosophy and was sort of reflecting on, memento mori, which is essentially remember that you're going to die. And, I didn't want to exit this life not having pursued something as challenging as this. I just felt the compulsion to go try something. I'd never done it before. I'm a lifelong W-2 employee, and just all those things really combined just gave me an itch that I wanted to scratch. I had been reading a lot of books for several years, so about 100 books a year for 5 years.
Yeah.
a coach that I loved, and all of this was expanding my horizons. And sort of like when I left a Ford Motor Company because role was going to be too narrow for me, I was starting to feel that way at Atlassian. I was doing all sorts of
Mm.
reading on marketing and sales and growth, and those weren't the nature of my work at Atlassian, and so I wanted to go pursue those and get exposure to all those other ideas.
So, couple questions. So that's very interesting. What's the backstory behind the name Group 18?
Yeah, so my last name is Noble, and the periodic table of elements, the far right
Yes.
hand column is the noble gases. That is
Right.
group 18 on the periodic table. So I had done an extensive research, never started a company. What am I going to name the first one? That's where I ended up. I thought it was a good mix of my name and a scientific approach.
Fair enough. Now, why when so the itch was and to do something interesting and you realize your rate of learning wasn't growing as fast. So you want to do something. Why the a services company at this point? Why did you consider anything else?
I did. I'll admit that I never considered myself a person who would have business ideas. That was
Mm.
just a limiting belief I had applied to myself. And I'd started just trying to practice. I would literally write bad ideas on a piece of paper and kind of try. But, there was no product or other thing that really felt like I had an idea that I wanted to pursue. A lot of it was just, I love problem solving. I love the complex systems work that I was doing at Atlassian. I really wanted to help smaller businesses get that same benefit, all the stuff I learned at Atlassian. So there was just a desire to go do some of that work kind of natively, and the fact that I didn't have these other ideas that were competing, but it is still something. And I know we talked before about another services business I was
Yeah,
starting, but I've been really attuned to the idea of starting a business. It's another services business that I'm starting, but
sure.
same idea. So yeah, that's the reason why.
Okay, that's very interesting. Obviously, the insights and the learnings you have from a scaler like Atlassian, bringing it to other smaller size companies is fantastic. One question I ask when I talk to other folks that have quit their corporate job to get into their own entrepreneurship journey, like as a business founder, one question I ask them is, so what kind of a runway did you have when you jumped in? Like
Yeah.
what was that mindset there?
That was a huge factor in my ability to leave for sure. I'm
Of course.
all things considered, relatively conservative. I already
Yeah.
mentioned I have a wife who is transitioning her career. I've got
Yes.
3 kids. I've got 2
Yeah.
dogs. I couldn't just quit and see if it worked out. So I had
Right.
given myself personal OKRs and had it set. One of the key results was essentially having enough runway to feel like I could make the leap. And so for me, it was multiple years of runway, and that kind of
Hey.
speaks to my conservativeness. That I wanted to be able to have the opportunity to explore where I really wasn't sure what combination of what I love doing and what the market would pay for existed for me. And I didn't
Mm.
want to have the pressure to feel like I needed to go figure that out in a short amount of time. I knew that amount of anxiety would really color the way I approached clients and whether I really wanted to give myself permission to be weird, to be honest. I wanted to go try a bunch of different things and see what do I really love so that when I'm ready to commit any particular path, if I do commit on a particular path, come to that naturally, like it was an emergent phenomenon as opposed to a pressure-based phenomenon. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And you started Group 18 start of this year?
Officially, that is when I left Atlassian in March, but I worked nights and weekends for a long time before that to build the momentum. Again,
Mm.
risk averse. I couldn't just quit and see if it was going to work out. I had to find a way to start networking. I had to find a way to kind of put the feelers out there and get a client. I had to convince someone, would you let me solve a problem for you and you pay me money, just to boil
Yeah.
it down to its essence. And so
I'm
it
gonna
was kind of that.
I'm gonna come to that. That's super interesting. So you were working evenings and weekends, the classic entrepreneurship life when you're thinking of making the transition. You start full time. You have a couple years of runway.
Yep.
So that's a big comfort.
Yes.
Now, getting the first customer in any business is first paying customer. I
Yep.
think it's a very big step. So tell us a little bit more about how you got your first paying customer.
Yeah, I'll tell 2 stories just because 'cause they're
Yes,
kind of
please.
related and so the first real revenue generating client was an old high school friend that I had reconnected with as part of this jumpstart. Because I also identify as a pretty shy and introverted person. I had never really formally done any kind of networking. I knew that going out here, I was gonna have to start talking to people and let them know what I was doing, and so I essentially was practicing on people that I felt very comfortable with, which is old friends from high school 30 years ago. And so I was talking to this friend, and He had some demand in his own business. He has a services business and he couldn't
Mm,
fulfill that demand. It was related to financial modeling, which is another thing I do in Group 18.
yeah.
He asked if I would be able to fulfill that. And I love Excel. I've never done financial modeling. So I said, yes, I'll figure it out. And he was willing to take a chance on me because it wasn't, load that he could satisfy anyway. And so having
Mm,
me express a desire and a willingness to figure that out on his behalf was a benefit to him anyway. And so that was the start of it. What was that? And then I'll quickly jump to the second one, which is more on
mm,
the fractional COO work, where again, I was doing networking I had not known before, that we had no connection, no friendship, no history. And we were just talking about our respected businesses. And he was telling me the challenges he was having in his. And I was just offering guidance and help. I've had my experience, I've read some books, I was giving him some guidance. And I left the meeting and I just was like, happy. I just was like, I helped someone. And I was just like, yay. And then I was running that weekend and I was just running and my mind was wandering. And I was like, oh, Kevin, that was a lead. You're supposed to do something about that. And so I ended up contacting that guy again and I wrote him an email. I'd read books on selling and, you sell the next step. And so I wanted to sell him on getting on a call. Hey, we had a great conversation. I think I could help you in your business. Would you want to get on a call and talk about it? And when we got on the call, he almost started selling me on working for him because he got excited about what we could do together. And so he was my first, like, no one I'd known before, willing to get started and get going down a fractional COO path.
amazing. So you said you met this guy. This person's out of your network. How
Yes.
did you meet him at an event? Like, what was the
This is not
connection?
an event. So I've learned shy introverted person. I'm not the big networking group kind of guy. That's not where I feel comfortable, but doing the private one-on-ones. And so he was an introduction from a mutual person. I'd have to think back to, how the specific
Okay.
jumps, but it was just networking and letting people know that I was out there doing something. They introduced me to this friend of theirs and he was sharing his challenges and here we are.
Okay. So that's and how long since you started Group 18 was this person's this opportunity come
I
about?
think this was very quick.
Mm,
I have to think back through the dates, but it was very quick because I wasn't ready. And honestly, part of my strategy, the rate he was offering to be transparent was lower than
mm,
I wanted to make by
sure.
quite a bit. But I also knew I needed the testimonial. I needed to give myself confidence. I wanted to be able to try anything and see if I could make it work. So that's part of the reason I said yes. But yeah, that's
And is that a tech company that you work with for Kevin?
no. You'll if we talk about all the different industries I work in, they're all over the place. This was a
Okay.
furniture manufacturer. And so,
Interesting.
yeah, that's not my background necessarily, but again, mechanical engineering and manufacturing I've done before and, you know, small enough company that it also got involved in the financial modeling because they didn't have a CFO. So, quickly ops and finance are so intermingled and started doing some cash flow forecasting for them to get a sense and tie all those things together. So it was a really, really great opportunity when that came around.
Amazing. You talked a little bit about the offer that you come up with, and this is always a challenge in any kind of business. In a SaaS business, you're like, what's the offer and how many tiers? In a professional service business, can you explain a little bit about your thinking about coming up with an offer
Yeah.
with your current services?
So for me, it's all kind of custom. I didn't know how I would do in sales. Honestly, it was like I felt pretty good about the service delivery. Sales was net new for me. Again, read a lot of books because that's one of my strategies to try to figure things out. But then the other is the live exposure, and I would just start talking to people, and honestly, it felt like they were all kind of different. But what I would do is I would listen to their challenges, and then I would try on the spot creatively to make an offer. Now, making an offer itself is sort of a senior leadership technique that I'd learned at Atlassian. You're there to solve
Mm,
problems and you're not there to be told what to do. So how do you listen when people are talking to figure out, what is the capacity of your team? What are the skills of your team? Your personal skills? How can you make an offer to solve a problem that you see? And so I think that helped me in the sales process to say, you're suffering through this. And I would kind of ponder and I'm just kind of myself, and I would say, are you willing to experiment around this? And I'm kind of thinking that I could help you with this. Maybe I've done fixed fee, I've done hourly, I've done, for one client, what I even did was I had never done the thing they wanted me to solve, but I thought I could figure it out. And I offered to solve it on a fixed fee for a certain amount. But I said, if you don't find it valuable, you don't have to pay me anything. I was putting all the power in their hands, but I believed I could figure it out. But I also just didn't want to put them in a tough position to have to say yes to this guy that, hasn't really done this before. And it really lowered the kind of barrier to them because obviously there's no real downside. They could say yes, it was a project they weren't going to do anyway because they didn't have the capacity. And so by saying yes to me, it's like, well, if this guy sucks, I don't pay anything anyway.
Right.
They said yes. They paid the invoice because it was good work, but it was just one of those other creative things that I just kind of came up with on the spot, just trying to figure out how do I get this person to say yes.
And this is such a common tactic when you're early on, when you don't have the testimonials and
That's
case
right.
studies behind you. You need to get those proof points
Yes.
sooner. I'm guessing now you don't, like, I guess 8 months in, you're not telling people about money back guarantee or something.
It has not come up lately, but I'm still in places that I don't have a track record yet for all these. I'm talking to different industries. I'm working with a PR firm that wants to do something. I'm working with heavy duty e-commerce, trucking company, and I'm working with life sciences or, so the industries are all different. And, so it's not like I'm doing the same work over and over again. So there still is a little element of being creative, but at least at this point, I've done it enough that I can speak the language. I'm confident about how to craft an offer, how to navigate getting through something. And so there's a little more confidence, but still not a lot of case studies explicitly.
Do you have a number in mind when you're making up that offer, when you're having a chat?
As
Like
far as
in
like
your
how much
yeah,
I'm trying to
yeah,
make.
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you imagine an engineer that does financial modeling. I built a little like decay curve for myself to say like based on how many hours and other clients, what is my if I'm on a call with someone and they're going to the like lower end, I'm going to raise my rates because I need a higher amount if I'm going to do a
Right,
simple amount of work. But if they're
right.
going to commit to longer, I can kind of
Yeah.
draw an asymptote, where I'm going to end up and kind of play around with that. So I've done that as a prep work for a call is to kind of build that model. And then the busier I get, the more confident I am reaching for another level of pay. So, if I've kind of built to where, okay, I'm now busy at X hours a week, I get a new client, I'm willing to test out the market and see is the market willing to pay a little bit more for my services now that I have a track record, now that I'm busy. And so that's the benefit of getting out here and getting a fuller book of business is to try to experiment more with whether the market can absorb raising my rates.
I guess classic economic supply and demand.
Yeah, that's right.
Your supply of hours is limited, so demand goes up, price will go up. You talked about networking. You're an introverted guy. I mean, your background as an engineer. You don't enjoy, and even in your newsletter, you've written that you don't find that come naturally to you, networking. But since starting the business, that's another thing that you have do things that you're uncomfortable
That's right.
about, and networking is one. Can you tell a little bit more about your networking experience? What are you currently doing with networking? Because there's some interesting things you're doing with networking, not
Yeah.
just one-to-one networking.
Yeah. So, yeah, I like what you said, though. I've learned to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And that was one thing with the networking is, I really was awkward in the beginning and never done it before. There were a few things that I did. One is joining communities. I felt like
Mm,
that was a way to give me sort of a warm intro to someone. Because honestly, staring at LinkedIn, having never like, is that where you start? Do you just write people on LinkedIn? I wasn't sure.
yeah.
And I felt uncomfortable doing that. But I thought joining a community, so I joined Sidebar, I joined the Operators Guild. I love the Operators Guild.
Hmm.
There's a few others that felt like, okay, now I'm part of a group, and in this group, there's an opportunity to then reach out to people one on one. And so
Mm,
maybe there's a conversation going on in Slack, and someone expresses a challenge. I would reach out to help them. So a lot of it is rooted in giving. So the same thing at Sidebar, I wrote about this in my newsletter, but I printed out the member directory, and in the directory, people would list the things that they needed help with. And so
mm,
I went through the hundreds of people and I would just highlight whether someone needed help with something that I could help them with. And then I would
mm,
reach out to them and say, hey, I noticed that you wanted help with OKRs. I have a lot of experience with OKRs. Do you want to get on a call and we can talk through OKRs or ops or scaling or whatever it was? So that was how I really kickstarted the networking. And then through that,
mm.
of course, now I'm meeting people and they're introducing me to other people. And so there's a little bit of a snowball building here, but a lot of it was kickstarting it with communities and then outreach based on giving.
And these OKRs, so let's say for tactically speaking, let's say you get on a call with an OKR. The purpose is, our intention is purely to help them, not to close a deal with them.
Correct. I'm not, which whether that's a good strategy or a bad strategy, I'm not here to assess. I just knew the pushy sales part doesn't resonate. And a lot of it really is, I do like to talk to people about their challenges. And that's
Mm,
how a lot of this has gone is like, even that when I mentioned earlier, that offer to someone that it was free they didn't find any value in it. That itself was just a networking call. I talked to someone about what I was doing. I asked if they knew any, CEOs that were having any scale challenges that they might be willing to talk to me. And so it wasn't a sales call, but it kind of turned into one. So I've kind of done it a lot, but it really is just networking. And I'm just there to listen and understand them and hear what their challenges are.
You also publish a weekly newsletter, which I have read through. It is really high quality. I'll give you that.
Thank you very
It's
much.
fantastically written. It's really, really good. Now, my question is, what was your motivation behind starting a newsletter? And yeah, let's start there.
Yeah, I knew that I was going to be leaving Atlassian. I knew that I wanted to have a long-term method of outreach. I was really thinking about a funnel strategy at some point.
Mm.
Like, what is an easy way for people to get to know me? But then there was also the kind of tactical thing, which is I read a lot and I have a very robust system of generating notes and tying things together. I'd worked with coaches and I had all these ideas, but I'd never forced myself to crystallize them and look across all of my different like books and data sources and experiences to then turn it into something that might help other people. And I loved my coaches in part because they really accelerated my own growth journey, in part by exposing me to things that I would have been exposed to otherwise. So I would explain a challenge to them and they've seen that 100 times and they would tell me, oh, this is how you think about that. And now I'm
Mm.
able to kind of go through those challenges a lot faster. I wanted to provide that to other people that are going on a similar leadership and growth journey is, what are all the frameworks, mental models, perspectives that you might learn from a coach or from reading? And how could I distill that for folks in a much more consumable way? And that was sort of the impetus, was kind of wanting to get that out after so much consumption and then knowing long term I didn't know what I might do with the newsletter eventually, but I knew that it was going to take a long time to get it going. And so no time like the present, just get going, get comfortable writing, see if you could build it. And then later when I need it, I've already gone through the work to get it live. And I'm at my 2-year anniversary, I think yesterday, of writing the
Wow.
newsletter. So
So you started the newsletter even before starting your practice full time.
formally, yes, I do. That was one of the earliest things I did, was like, I'm going to get this started because I don't know where I'm going to go, but I know this will probably feature somewhere in it. So yeah, 2 years ago.
And has this been a part of your like top of the funnel strategy?
It will be. It is not
It
right
will
now.
be.
If you went to that, the branding isn't aligned. I
Yeah.
wrote it from
Yeah.
I created a personal URL and then send the
Hmm.
newsletter from that personal URL. I still
Yeah.
send it from there, even though Group 18 is here. There's no Group
Yeah.
18 branding. At some
Right.
point, I'll think about whether and how I might want to convert those things or not. But right now, there's not really a strong tie.
You're not thinking of, accumulating the audience yet and nurturing them with Group 18,
Correct.
none of that. You're just putting it
That is
out there.
when I did my OKRs for this year, that was a debate, that and, creating courses. I used to do essentially like training things at Atlassian. I would get my team together, 10 to 30 people, and I would walk them through a framework or a mental model or something I'd read. I enjoy the teaching aspect. I think I might do that as part of Group 18. But when I did my OKRs this year, I decided that I wanted to delay both kind of deeper newsletter activation and coursework for, I wanted a year of doing more Group 18 work. I wanted the lived experience of trying to build this thing. What are the things that I'm experiencing and learning? And I didn't want to be distracted by the newsletter because I don't see that as the primary thing. I enjoy writing it, honestly. It takes me about 5 hours every Sunday and I like writing it, but it's not really where I want to drive it into my strategy. I want to focus my week on delivering really great value to the clients I do have in Group 18.
Let me ask you this question. Currently, for Group 18, what has been the biggest driver of new opportunities or pipeline for you?
Yeah. It's two things. Networking was the beginning. It's
Mm.
all of my business is word of mouth. I'm not running paid ads. I'm not doing anything to try to do a one to many kind of thing. So networking really was I talked to someone, they introduced me to someone else. Since then, now the bigger is the referrals from existing clients. So, the best way to get a new client is to have a happy existing client. And that's been a really great avenue. So, a lot of my clients are themselves in communities or they're in a ownership circle and they meet once a month with other business owners. And if I can make them so happy with my services, they're compelled to share that with their friends because they want their friends now to be successful as well. And so that's been a bigger avenue of work for me, is the referrals from happy existing clients, more so than the networking, but still driving both avenues. But referrals is now a bigger thing.
And do you do the referral part of generating referrals proactively or does it happen organically?
So far, it's happened organically. Every once in a while, I remember I should ask this person for, what milestone might I use to trigger doing so. But honestly, it's been organically. They'll tell me, "Oh, I just was having my circle, and I shared your information and your LinkedIn and your website with everybody so that you can help them." And I'm so immensely thankful for all the clients that do that. Especially unprompted. There's no like incentive structure in place. I should put that, and I'm very thankful. But it's not like I have a I don't know a referral program yet. It's just that they're getting good work and they want their colleagues to benefit from a similar experience, and they share it out of the kindness of their heart.
Do you think having Atlassian worked at Atlassian helps a lot with the reputation and the brand and the trust?
Honestly, no, and that's because I'm working with like furniture
Right.
manufacturers
That's true.
and trucking companies.
Yeah, they probably don't even know.
Yeah, they don't know Atlassian, which I find so funny because I lived in Atlassian for over a decade. It was my whole life. I use Confluence still as part of my business.
Right.
I'm so used to
Right.
it. And then I'll mention people Atlassian, and they'll say Atlassian. What is
Yeah.
it? They have no idea.
Right.
If I worked
Interesting.
more in tech, I imagine that brand would have more cachet. And certainly I have one tech client, and they know Atlassian and a few here and there. But
Of
no, so
course.
far it hasn't seemed like a big driver.
Funny enough, and probably a bit curious, I think more people know of Jira
Yes,
than the name Atlassian,
100%.
right? So that's interesting. I guess we're going to try to wrap up now. You talked about frameworks. You mentioned OKR. What's your favorite framework to use in a business when they're coming up with their yearly planning or quarterly planning?
Well, in the quarterly planning construct, I certainly think a
Yeah.
lot about OKRs as a
Okay.
concept and how to do those really well. Again, I did that for almost the entire decade at Atlassian. We did OKRs at least 8 years, I think, out of the 10. So I have a lot of lived experience for how to do those. And then, of
Mhm.
course, read the books, etc. And I love how they align a group on what's important. Done well, they also can develop your junior staff. You're
Mhm.
teaching people accountability and autonomy. You're letting them come up with, a certain percentage of the goals on their own, they're figuring out the tactics to reach them. I think they're just a really, really great framework for alignment and scale. It also comes in, there's an idea, this thing called the rule of 3 and 10. That's what I use a lot. So my business, I like to do a lot of transformation work. That's kind of how I
Mhm.
sell my fractional services. And the idea is every time you triple in size, everything needs to change. So
Mhm.
I classically, if you've got a hiring process at 100 people, it's probably the same when you had 10 people, because
Mhm.
no one bothered to go back and rethink the hiring process. And, that
Right.
happens with all your processes and tools. And so when it comes
Uh,
to that kind of planning, that's another thing you can ask is, get a sense of when was the last time we touched a process. And if you haven't looked at it in a while, it's very likely that there's some entropy has come in. It's no longer effective. And then it's kind of ossified. It's gotten calcified or stuck where no one knows how to modify that process. They just suffer through a crappy process. And so by shining a light on those, that's another thing that can help determine what's a good thing to go tackle.
Very interesting. I didn't know of rule of three. So what's rule of three and 10? You
Just
said
the
10.
tripling. It's kind of the,
The tripling.
it's a
Okay.
good rule of thumb, the threes and 10. So 30
I
to
see.
100 to 300.
I see. I see. I see. Got it. Got it. I guess what's one advice you'd give someone who's thinking of, they're in their corporate job and they're considering quitting and starting their own business as a founder? What would be
Yes.
one piece of advice you'd give them?
It's definitely going to be the runway.
Mm,
I've seen a lot of people that try the fractional work or building new service businesses, and they run out of money before they find their fit. This kind of work is so trust based, and you're building relationships, you're meeting people, you're doing work, and you've got to let that snowball and flywheel build. And a lot of people run out of money before they gave a chance to build. So they could be successful if they had more time. They just didn't get themselves enough time. So building out that runway and things you can do to mitigate it are getting started before you quit. So don't just quit and figure out, I'll figure it out on my own.
mm,
Use, I think it's Cal Newport talks about using money as a neutral form of value. At least that's where I heard it from. And, so if you think you're capable of something, go out there and try to convince someone to hire you to solve a problem for them. And that'll give you a lot of education about your whole process. How do you do sales? What is your offer? Yeah, does the market value your work at the rate that you value it at? So don't do an Excel file in absence of real information that says, oh, I can make a lot of money because look at what I'm going to make. Go test it out with other people. So build a runway, but you can mitigate how much risk you're creating by getting started before you make the big leap.
okay. You mentioned you read a lot. You read on an average 100 books a year.
That's right.
If you had to suggest one book to someone who's an entrepreneur? What would be one book you'd give them?
One book for an entrepreneur. I would not recommend some of the tactical books because they're helpful when you have a particular problem to solve, but not everybody has that particular problem. And
Right.
there, I mean, like if
Yeah.
you could read a positioning book, you could read a sales book. I think
Sure.
the ones for mindset are going to be bigger. There's one called Changing on the Job that's probably one of my favorite books. I think it's Jennifer Garvey Berger. And I know the concept is like forms of mind because that's how she refers to it. But I think another name is adult development theory, something else. But it really helps you understand how people see the world, essentially, and there's a socialized form of mind. And in a socialized form of mind, you often absorb values from revered others. And then you go into self-authored, and then you go into transforming, self-transforming. And so I just really fascinated by someone else describing a human's ability to absorb greater and greater levels of mental complexity, because absorbing greater levels of mental complexity is a really important skill, I think, in driving entrepreneurship and, yourself as a human.
100%.
And so I think it's a really good framework. And it also helps you when you're doing change management or meeting with others to kind of understand what kind of form of mind might this person be in. And given that, where will they feel mental tension? If you're talking to someone in a socialized form of mind and they get their values from they're not going through a self-authored way of defining that value. So any kind of rational discussion is unlikely to get them to change because they didn't arrive at their values from a rational internal discussion. They got to it from a revered other. And so, kind of ramming out, but that's a really good framework for people to go and get if they're curious about that topic.
I need to check it out because I've never heard of it. This is super cool. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks a lot for this. Really appreciate it. I really enjoyed and learned a ton. Thank you for this.
Yeah, it was really my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Cool. I'll stop